And greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Want to remind everybody, please hit that like, share, and subscribe. And of course, there's a PayPal link in the details section for anybody who wants to share some love. Every little bit is appreciated, always helps. And of course, the StreamYard link is down there for anybody who wants to join the panel. And we're going to get right into it since we don't have anybody up here yet, and get into a review of a video I did a few years back. Let me see here, 4 years ago. And this is the importance of understanding trust law. And like I said, no matter what kind of contract you're in this public society, its authorization comes from a trust of some sort. So we're going to go over an ecclesiastical trust, which is not a public trust. And the ecclesiastical trust is the spiritual trust. This is what we get from as a foundation of the laws of the lands, whether it be here in America or any foreign lands. They all use the same principle of a supreme law of the land as the basis for the corporate laws that are therefore instituted through admiralty and maritime. But again, that foundation comes from the spirit of the law, which is the religions and churches and those kind of concepts. So let's get into it. It's only 22 minutes and 41 seconds long. And I don't know how much I'm going to have to say on this. I think I put it out there pretty clear the first time, but of course, after 4 years of research, there's probably going to be some elements I might brush up on. So again, feel free to hit that panel link and come on up and join. And here we go. Good evening, everybody. Keith here. I'm going to give everybody a chance to get on here tonight for a little bit. Like I said in my next video, I wanted to talk about ecclesiastical trusts, and so that's what we're going to do. And the first thing I want to talk about in regards to ecclesiastical things, blue is the color of ecclesia. So in your documents, your private documents, when we're making these up, if we construct them in the color of royalty, which is purple, and then autograph them in blue, that shows our capacity that we autographed in ecclesia. The capacity of the document itself is in regards to our, quote, royalty. And if everybody's got their pen and paper handy, one thing you should really research is Weiss's Concise Trustee Handbook. Weiss's, W-E-I-S-S''S. Concise, C-O-N-C-I-S-E, Trustee, T-R-U-S-T-E-E, Handbook. It's only about 99 pages long. I suggest you read it. It will tell you your position as trustee and how to manage that. First off, I want to explain trusts are started in two different ways. One way that we're all aware of is by the event, the behaviors. If I create an event where I give possession of a truck to my daughter and tell her I want her to keep that so that when her daughter becomes of age to learn how to drive and travel, she can use it for that. That's an express trust, and it's expressed verbally. If you write it down, then it's an express trust written down. If I just give it to her. This goes to the same concept of contracts. You can have a literal contract, which is written down, or an oral contract, which is verbal between the two people contracting. But that still establishes, even if there's no other third party, that still establishes a trust under ecclesia because it brings in the sovereignty of equal consideration, equal benefit, owe no man anything but to love one another. And that's how you measure your exchanges. First and foremost, agreeing that what I'm going to exchange with you in return is going to have equal value. And again, that's just a consideration between the two people, not dependent upon any monetary system. I have to somehow express the intent of its use to create a trust. Understand that part. The second way is by operation of law. And when we talk about operation of law, we're talking about, basically, you hear everybody talk about all crimes are commercial. Well, that means anything that's done in a commercial.
And as I'm saying here, anything done in a commercial venue is in accordance with a contract. And in the public, that's always going to be a written document. Always going to be a written document. A written document is evidence of a trust. Or, excuse me, a written contract.
Capacity is a crime. And it holds true if you look at it in reality, because like I said, all these court transactions are a transfer.
Yes, implied versus expressed. That's a very pertinent concept to understand. Everything that operates in the system right now is implied, which means it is a presumption. Until you express it, the quote trust that they express is merely implied, and you can take benefit of that in various different ways or various different capacities. That would be either as a grantee, a trustee, or a beneficiary. Now, the only one that really doesn't get any benefit from it commercially is the grantee, because he's the one gifting and expects nothing in exchange. The assignment of a trustee by a trustor working with the grantee or grantor is the one that creates the trust. And that is the assignment of a trustee to hold property in abeyance until the beneficiary can receive it.
Of Federal Reserve notes. And that
has to be express, literally, and it has to be concise.
Transfer is the creation of a trust. The creation of a trust, as I explained last night, can be done in several ways. One of those ways, which is a will and testament. If we look at the defendant in these cases, he's always a decedent. He's a deceased testator. Okay, learn this stuff. And it's his will that we're executing. That's what has to be determined, is the deceased testator's will. So when we go to these court cases, we accept the state's presentation of facts and plead guilty to those facts, accepting them upon the will of the deceased testator to his benefit. He's going to be the beneficiary. You're going to be the trustor. You're going to appoint executor. You're going to appoint the administrator as trustee and make the defendant the beneficiary. Okay?
That's as simple as it gets, because, again, remember the concept that it's the benefactor that gives to the beneficiary. This is the same thing as a grantee. So when you step in your proper capacity to settle the accounts as benefactor, it's acknowledging that you are the one that gave things to begin with.
So that's the operation of law one. That's how a trust is created in law. That's why all these court cases you go to, it's the creation of a trust. If you play your part correctly to create that trust as the executor, then you do the correct assignment of the trustee to settle the accounts to benefit the defendant.
And I used the wrong term back then. 4 years ago, I was still trying to learn all these terms. But again, executor is not the proper term here. Executor is the one that takes over the estate and executes the will based upon the testator. And so that is truly a deceased person, and that is a executor of somebody else's will. When it comes to your will, you are not the executor. You are the executive in all the things that you do, except that when you come to settle the estate, you're coming as settlor, because you are not, in fact, the grantee. The grantee was mom in this case, in the implied trust.
That way there's no detriment to the defendant. Okay? Let's see here. Remember, all these court cases are also probate courts. If you look up the definition of probate, it's establishing a will.
So when you go into court and they're saying there is no will, they're calling you forth to state your will. And if you don't, then they will administrate it continuously as if though it's a probated estate. It's not until you give your living will and stand firm on it, knowing what you're saying and doing so competently that you will be successful. And I've got all this research and I still haven't been. It is a complicated system that they've developed. And again, just like the English language, in a sense, it's very beautiful. If you do it right, it will protect yourself and all of your legacy heirs, generation after generation, so long as you don't, as long as that knowledge is carried on. And that's the important part again. The true benefit is the knowledge.
A future trust execution. So
that's why you have down in the chat section there, the 2 Timothy 2:15, study to shew thyself approved unto God, workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Because trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. That's why I seek the counsel of the Father in heaven, and that's the spiritual sense that's already written on my heart of what is right and wrong, and that's as simple as it gets. Everything we've been taught in our life is actually a distraction from that simplicity.
You're in these courts, and you have to establish the will of a future trust execution. That's why, like I said, these 1099 forms have to be done.
It's a constructive trust process in the courts. Again, like I said here, every time they drag you into the courts, it's the beginning of a new trust.
In a certain timely manner, because some of them can't be executed until the trust is executed. In the meantime, it's just in the phase of a will yet, of a deceased testator. That deceased testator has to finally be dead. All accounting has to be done. All accounts have to be settled. Once the accounts reach a zero balance, then the trust is executed. Proceeds are paid forward from the dividends so people can appropriately claim the taxes and income.
And that's the accounts that are settled are the indebted accounts to other creditors. So as a part of the process of execution of a will, if the deceased testator passed on and left any kind of debts, those have to come out, and you have to pay the creditors first before you can distribute or disperse the property, so being distributed amongst the heirs.
The income and pay forward the taxes. And that's how that stuff works. So the word probate means to prove or validate. Every court you have to go in and prove and validate your side of the will. That's all it is. That's all it is. Probate is the procedure by which a will is approved by the court as valid and last will of a deceased testator.
And this is the problem with the courts. Again, Scott versus McNeil. A court of probate has no jurisdiction over the estate of a person who is in fact alive. Now, again, this goes to the competency of these public servants that are supposed to know this stuff, as public service is a public trust. Therefore, they should be knowledgeable in the trust aspect as a priority element in order to perform that contract.
Person of the will. It always also confirms the person appointed as executor in the will.
And therefore, if you have an administrator overseeing a will of any sort, the will of a living man, that's an administration. So it's not truly considered in their eyes as a probate situation, but that is in fact the underlying element. I don't care how anybody else looks at it. Look at Harvard's Law Review, the right to follow trust property when commingled. And that's exactly what happens at enumeration at birth, is there's a commingling of data elements that do not belong.
Will. As executor of the will, you just assign an arbitrator to settle all the accounts. Being a deceased testator, the account itself can no longer be used. They're admitting that the account is that of a deceased testator. So when you construct the...
And again, that goes to that record. That's what we're correcting. We're not correcting the people. We're not correct. They will be educated and they will learn eventually. But again, that's what makes it so hard on our part. We have to be the educators. They're not going to be willing to learn. They're just going to be willing to do their job as their boss tells them. So this information has to go up the line and back down. And that's why I say, again, the foundation of the supreme law of the land comes from the ecclesiastical foundation of the spiritual religions that operate each and every nation.
Will properly, upon the execution of the trust, the account itself is no longer usable. It's a collapsing of the trust because it no longer has any valuable use.
And that's part of the problem here is that, again, enumeration at birth is the establishing of a burial trust, and that burial trust in a probate state is being administrated as if there's no executor because there hasn't been one assigned. The trust itself was expressed as an implication, but never finalized. No trustor actually created a express trust. It still remains implied, a presumption. And therefore, they just go ahead with the presumption.
The testator is deceased and confirmed upon the execution of the trust per his will.
Greetings, John. How you doing tonight, brother?
Doing good, Keith. Really good.
Good. What do you think so far?
Well, I'm trying to make this easy, which is not easy to do. But I just wanted to I just penned it out. What we're doing is we're putting data in, right? Or your mom is, then you are later in life. But without directives.
Correct.
So if it's all right, so if it's a computer, Keith, if that goes in, they're going to spit out a receipt, but it has errors in it. See?
Yep.
Then what happens there, Keith? After that, they wait for the correspondent to go into the system, with activity. Then they administer it under corporate law. See, and then they're,
Yes.
of course, investing behind the scenes. That's what I'm trying to, just trying to make sense of this.
And that's absolutely correct, because that's the situation that mirrors a probate estate, is a corporate entity. It's known as a corporate fiction, therefore not alive, even though they don't call it a decedent. As a corporate entity like Nike or something like that, Coca-Cola, that's not considered a decedent estate, yet it's a corporate fiction, which is kind of synonymous in the modern times. This is why they merged equity with common law. The common law is the contract law, and equity is trust law. So they merged them, and that's why I say contracts all evidence a trust.
Right. Okay. As long as we're definitely in agreement of what's going on. I'm just trying to say it in one breath, which, like I said, I need a heart and lung machine to help me do it.
I hear you. I wish I'd have had one back in my last trial, because like I said, I was yelling and screaming and cussing and hollering, calling all kinds of names, running out of breath, and that's just that psychological aspect that I was still in, of not understanding. That's why I said I'm done. I've got to study this stuff. Study to shew myself approved, and so that's what I've been doing. That's it. And again, like I said earlier, I still haven't figured it out completely. I'm getting ready to move forth again with the birth certificates I finally got. I'm going to be going down to court this next week to open order hour and make a presentment about the probated estate and my my opinions about or my interpretation of what I've researched, and as well as my companion and these collections that these people are coming after for, when it's plain that she's no longer a U.S. business. She's retired. Can't get any simpler than that. And yet these people don't seem to understand that. And that's because they don't understand the system, how it works. They're going along in the same cognitive dissonance. And that's that thing about just doing my job. They don't really care about anything else. And that's pathetic.
Right. Your
Understand
companion isn't a employee of the I mean, what'd you say it last night? I wrote it down here. Employee, or you're a classified employee.
Right. You're classified as an employee. And that goes back to that variances from categorical pretreatment standards that are that have fundamentally different factors. And that's the classification that you go through throughout life. Each thing that you get involved with is a statistical classification so that they can track the information. Again, that's nothing but the record. They're not truly tracking you per se. They're tracking the information, and the information is attached to you, so they consequently end up tracking you by that.
Yeah. So when we talk about this ecclesiastical trust, back to the very beginning, the colors, the ink in purple as the body of the trust. That again, that's the body of the trust itself is the body of your ecclesiastical trust. It is your own private declaration. And one of the languages that's used in it is the colors of the ink. Okay.
And I don't think I mentioned it in this video. I haven't reviewed it myself. It's like I said, it's been 4 years. I can't remember every aspect. But I do not believe I mentioned one of the important things about expressing a ecclesiastical trust is the Lord's Prayer. That Lord's Prayer pretty much you could interpret as the 20 maxims of equity, all within that one little prayer. And so the Lord's Prayer, according to my interpretation, is an express trust ecclesiastically, and there's nothing that can beat it. I mean, the entire world works on those scriptures, the spiritual scriptures of their religious foundations, and that's the original trust in every culture. It's a multilateral sovereignty, again, where you can have two people that are common to the land make a private contract without any third-party interveners, and would be under the spiritual foundation of what those two people at arm's length making a handshake contract are operating under. So it doesn't need to be expressed literally until somebody in the public challenges it. And that's what people don't understand, I don't think, is that that's the true challenge in all of these commercial venues, is that you have to correct the contracts by relating it to the trust that you're involved in a superior manner. So you can have a public trust and have to take an oath and require a education for licensing for certain duties within that federal, state, or municipal office or agent capacity. And those are the only ones that public trust really applies to as a duty or obligation. And the rest of the population are supposed to be benefactors. That's the importance of the data elements, and knowing that you're the one giving them to a beneficiary record. So it's very important to understand the data elements that you're giving them to, or giving to that record, and how they're being interpreted as far as capacity as a trustee or benefactor. Very important, and that's the one of the things that they leave out in the public education system, which leaves everybody at a default position to begin with, because they weren't ever educated on it. And that's why it's important, if you learn this stuff, to turn around and pass it on to your next generation, because the public education system isn't going to do it. And it's important to help people understand that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. But it's supposed to extend beyond his lifetime by the mere fact that now he can teach others how to do it. That's the importance of understanding this stuff so it can be passed on to your younger generation, because the public society will not do it. It is not formed that way.
Okay.
So,
Another one of
Keith,
the languages of this document
just
is
going
your,
back to my batch processing analogy, if you know anything about computers, like encoding and decoding, they'll tell you that the encoder is everything. It defines the signal, it defines its quality, its shape. You know, it's just so critically important. The
Yeah, and
encoder, yeah.
yeah, and that goes even to the English language. That's what we're talking about here. The computer programming is first developed off of the binary language, zeros and ones, and then it went to BASIC, which was just a plain English if-then-go-to programming. You literally typed in English language, if A equals B, then go to C. Go to C. If A equals D, then go to E. If A equals F, then go to G, or various different parameters. And you can, it's like a scaffolding. The more paths you, or structures you put in there, the more places you can reach on that scaffolding. And the scaffolding of the programming just gets larger and larger as modern time comes along. And it's again, just like the English language. It's a beautiful thing if you understand it.
your seal, your stamp and seal. A lot of people are going to use their family crest and coat of arms, and that's going to be stamped up in the top right hand corner. They're going to have a flag of some kind of military or merchant style up in the right hand corner, presenting who they're presenting themselves as in regards to foreign entity, a national entity, and their purpose, their intent. Remember, everything in trust is revolving around intent, and that's how you establish trust, is some kind of communication of that. So if they see your flag and it's a flag of ill intent, there is no trust. They don't want to construct wills and trusts with you. They know you. They recognize you as an enemy. We have to show that we're not that enemy.
And that's why it's best to run with a neutral flag. A neutral flag, a white flag. That's why they have a white flag for wartime. It's a neutrality. Now, under the rules of land warfare, they also have another flag, or signage, they call it, I guess. Black and white, diagonal from one corner to the other, the top portion being white, the bottom portion being black, or excuse me, top portion being black and the bottom portion being white. And this is just a simple message that says there are two elements here, and they are different, distinctly different, day and night, black and white. It's a coming together of two things.
In the construction and wording, the language of the trust itself, the words that you put on the documents, that has to show your intent in that language as well, as being that peaceful body going forward and carrying forth the will of all man as a responsibility of your duty to your fellow man in correct stewardship for equality of all man, for that commonality of being man.
When it comes to what do you think about using the term grantee instead of benefactor? If you are the one that is creating or giving a gift, and you need a trustee, then you get somebody to name as a trustor, so that they can create the trust, and that's a taking upon an assignment, and they have to be legally competent in order to create that trust, to then turn around and be able to hold that property in abeyance for the beneficiary. Now, when it comes to the benefactor again is the living soul, whereas grantee is done in person. So the benefactor could be the same thing as a grantor, either way. But when it comes to the grantee and beneficiary, then they are distinctly different. The grantee does in fact give to the beneficiary, but the beneficiary only receives through a trustee, not a trustor. The trustor simply creates the trust, whereas the grantor is the one that gives. The benefactor is the one that receives. The beneficiary is the one that receives. And once a grantor distributes a gift to a trustor to create a trust, he is done with the trust. Now all liability lies on the trustee, period. And this is what's happening in this commercial system, is the documentations for transfers of property are being committed by trustees, public servants, known as public trust trustees. And when we partake of that system and don't know how it's operating, we oftentimes just give a blank endorsement as a signature, and that's merely an amendment to an insurance contract or an insurance policy. And that insurance policy amendment is switching places with the trustee and beneficiary. So you now become the trustee, and the insurance company becomes the beneficiary. Greetings, Iman. How you doing tonight?
All is well, brother. All is well. And I've been saying the Lord's Prayer just recently all over again. All is well.
Yep. Thank you. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And Goldsmith, all glory goes to him. I can only hope that I can explain it enough that you can comprehend it. And this is one thing I also tell people along with that: don't believe me, don't believe the neighbor, don't believe the government. For crying out loud, don't believe your mother. Do your research. All glory goes to him. Study to shew thyself approved. Always seek his counsel, and he will set things right. He will allow you to rightly divide the word of truth, so that there is no mistake.
That's the basis of all your common law, which is your ecclesiastical law. A lot of people call the ecclesiastical trust a common law trust, a pure trust. Some even call it a private trust. Private trust is actually a little bit different, but we'll get into that in the next video. So basically, understand that the ecclesiastical trust is your own pure private document. Now, when we talk about putting it on the record, we don't put the actual document on the record. What we put on record is a verification, either through your witness, your firsthand witness to the document with a notary, or your firsthand witness performing a quorum of firsthand witnesses, at least 3 plus yourself, and then including a public notary, whatever it takes to verify that you do have such an ecclesiastical trust established. It has been viewed and it is known and will be verified in any court of law or equity. And that's all that has to be exposed. That private document always remains private, but you provide a recorded proof of verification. And that's the important document to enter into the public record through the county recorder. That becomes part of that trust. You make that a part of that trust. That's the physical body of the trust that you can present in a public commercial forum to show that you do have a valid ecclesiastical trust. And that's what befuddles them, because they have no access to that record. It's a private record. And the public shall have no access.
The grantee is actually the beneficiary, guys, in case you don't understand that. Just like the beneficiary or benefactor gives to the beneficiary, the grantor gives to the beneficiary. The grantor, trustor, and benefactor are the living beings. The grantee, the trustee, and the beneficiary are those living beings as so named in the documents. So as a living being, I am an adjective or a verb, more explicitly a verb. I am an act of God. As the name is applied, that transforms a verb, me, myself, I, a living soul. In that venue, a literal venue, a written venue only, it now becomes a noun, which is merely a descriptor. Right. And trustee holds legal title, but a grantee holds absolute title. This is the title in equity. Greetings, Chris. How you doing tonight, brother?
Oh, quite excellent. How are you?
Good, good.
I'm glad I caught you. I just jumped out of the bath and was just very fascinated that you had gone over this subject again. As I was fascinated the last time that you went over the subject of the ecclesiastical trust and how that works. And I'm overjoyed to hear you again going on about it. And I only had one small question which I don't mean to be perverse in any way, but could you explain for me possibly how the trust might look like in a ecclesiastical matrimony situation versus, say, a prostitution situation, and how what are the differences there?
Well, yeah, that's the way my companion and I live. We don't need a piece of paper to acknowledge our communion under our God in heaven. That doesn't that's an expression merely by our physical presence being together and being committed to each other, and that's no one else's business. It is not a contract. Therefore,
but see, like, as we know, in the oldest business in the world is prostitution, right? Which is more of a public contract. And how is that in contrast to the matrimony situation where there's that's kind of bewildering my mind, and I really think I understand it, but I just really wanted to put it towards you because somebody had asked me that question. I was telling them I didn't feel qualified to answer it, but I would ask the man that probably does know.
Well, yeah, and that's I can only hope that I know, and I believe that I have studied to shew myself approved, and that is Matthew 18 verse 20, where if two or more witnesses come forth in my name, therefore I am. And that's me and my companion, and we come forth in his name, and that's the supreme law of the land as a foundation based upon those scriptures.
Okay, right. I concur. I concur with that, for sure.
It needs no other expression than us saying, no, we already have a communion under our God, under our Father which art in heaven. And unless you can deny that trust, then we stand firm in it. If you can show how that trust is not valid, and that would go to our hearts, you would have to be able to show that the intent in our hearts is false. And you can't do that.
Right. So, like in a situation where people exchange floating rate notes, that would not necessarily be the same trust setup, but indeed it would be considered a trust.
Right. It's still considered a trust, and the floating rate exchange notes is based on a multilateral trust, which is the international union. Again, it's the charter at the UN for the nation, and then they are the grantee at the UN, a group of nations that are saying, okay, we'll grant you entrance into our association. That makes you a trustee of our association, and so the United States itself is a trustee under the United States of America's charter, and therefore the states are beneficiaries in that trust.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. It really does.
The states ceded their jurisdiction to the United States for that specific benefit, the international protections, because they have landlocked states. That's what the states are benefiting from, is the Admiralty maritime territorial jurisdictions that don't enter into the land on landlocked states. They have to use the waterways.
Right. That's very
why,
interesting, how that language is used, with like birth canals and all that semen and all that information, all that language that they use connected to the Admiralty Maritime.
And that's the thing I say about the Civil War. That's what the Civil War was about. It truly wasn't about slavery, in my opinion. It was about that Mississippi River and the Missouri River in the Northwest in the Louisiana Territory, that was purchased because Napoleon needed funds for his war, and that allowed the Civil War and its placating or conflation that it was about slavery to even come into the minds of people. If it's about any kind of slavery, it was about the freeing of the colored slaves and making everybody a slave across the board. That's what it was.
Yeah,
That's
and it appears to me that it appears to me that the Civil War went off the battlefield and kind of entered into the monetary system, the financial system.
Well, that's
by
why
what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what it did. It moved, particularly for America, the need for land wars to paper. This is why all the UCC forms, those are vendor forms known as Battle of the Forms. They've literally taken the war off of the land, moved it onto the sea through special maritime territorial jurisdiction of contracts.
Wow. Well, that's very powerful that you're saying that. My mind totally gets it. That
goes to that information that you're supposed to study to shew thyself approved. That's why they did that, in my opinion, is they knew the population generally didn't have that knowledge, and so it would be able to, it had a very good possibility and probability of being fomented as intended.
Perpetual dishonor for those that didn't know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Which gave them
individual has access to all public records because
jurisdiction.
Yes. Made everything military. That's Congress walked out, sin die. You have a republic if you can keep it. Nobody kept it. The republic still exists on paper, and we can still fill those offices, but we've got to learn how to do it for just reasons and not for emoluments and pay.
And that republic is on an individual basis, not something outside of ourselves. Is that a correct way of thinking, perhaps?
Correct, and that's why in order to fill those offices, we have to do it individually without the emoluments. We have to be able to come in equity and put forth with clean hands. That way, if you do a good job for the people and they want to gift you, they will gift you privately. You know, the forefathers of the American colonies went to the local bar to have their meetings. They didn't have a White House, but they still had their meetings. They didn't have a public office, but they still had their meetings.
But the obverse is not true. So realize that, and that's the importance of this.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's like, why is the bar, the Barabbas, still in control of those estates today? This kind of interesting that you bring that point up. You know?
Right, because they're the ones that came in and did all the paperwork. Again, remember, it was the forefathers that before the public education system came about for hundreds of years, they were teaching their own children all of this stuff. That's why when it came to 1776, they were able to establish a government to begin with. Otherwise, they'd have just been a bunch of heathen savages, like they called the Indians, living like the Indians.
Right, and those were them one-room schoolhouses.
Yeah.
Before the public school system, militarized school system was implemented.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Wow, what a great history lesson this class is. Thanks for expressing that, and the people in our crew will be very enlightened to hear this conversation.
Well, yeah, that's what the public education system is, guys. They're giving you a fish to feed you for a day, and that's it. That public education is not going to feed you for a lifetime. It's going to destroy you.
Yeah.
This
no doubt.
Trust. It's purely private with verification. But again, like I said, with that quorum of witnesses, make sure that's a quorum of witnesses that are not biased. Don't just use family and friends. Those can often be considered biased and therefore make a contestability of the validity of that trust. So when we do these trusts, make sure that we're using a good one to do is like the pastor of 4 different kinds of churches. You just got to use your head about this stuff. Have an ecclesiastical trust that's witnessed by a Presbyterian church, a Baptist minister, blah blah blah. They pretty much have to take that on record. So, think about this stuff and just use.
And remember, it was the church that kept records before 1655. Now, in 1654, the plague ran through London. Now, in 1665, they had the Great Fire of London, which I, according to my research, interpret that, in my opinion, believe that they actually set that fire on purpose so that they could transfer the records of the church to the civil units, which is military. Okay, so we had the plague, and then the city, the Great Fire of London, which I think they set on purpose, not only to get rid of the rats, but as a what do they call them, red flags or whatever, to distract from the real activity that was going on, which was the transfer of the records to the civil unit. And then in 1666, you had the Seneca v. Trust Act. It all falls in line. So again, it's studied to show itself.
And I believe that's why the record is now, like in Louisiana, still in the parish, and in most states it's in the county, where the county record is. That's still the ecclesiastical record, is it not?
Yes, and that's the enumeration at birth is recorded by the birth clerk, and then certified by a doctor and treasurer of the hospital or a registrar or whatever. And that doctor is the one that takes a Hippocratic oath to Apollo and the Greek gods. Okay. So there's
absolutely, I concur with that.
There's a literal.
And it's also under the Gregorian calendar, timestamp copyright, rather than the Julian calendar. Is that a accurate understanding in your opinion?
Say that again.
I'm saying also there's something to do with the timestamps and the events associated with the Gregorian calendar versus the Julian calendar, one being BC and the other one is AC, the Julian calendar.
I think a lot of that has to do with more along the lines of conflating the timeline of history. As we learn more and more in modern times and stuff, we're finding out about Tartarians and this and that that supposedly maybe the dinosaurs didn't die out until maybe 14,000 years ago when people were around. So there were actually people on the land when dinosaurs were around. This and that. It's just we have to remember that every day is his, and it's by a lunar and solar cycles of seasons. 4 seasons in a year, and one day is a year and 1 year is a day in his eyes. And so the timeline isn't really so much my concern as the events, because it really doesn't matter when they happened, it's the order that they happened. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I concur with that. When I make my own personal manor roll estate records for my family, I'm always using a Julian calendar date to date those in all lowercase, spelled out, and not numbers. Just to make a distinction.
Yeah, in the year of our Lord 1000, all written out like you would on a check. Yep, same thing.
Use your heads.
Yeah, I was just checking with you to make sure that you concur that would be a correct understanding. I don't want to use the world's timestamp on my private ecclesiastical house documents or manor roll documents.
Yeah, and that's why I use an epoch on a lot of my documents. I go to an epoch converter and it gives me a digital number that you can punch back into that epoch converter and find out exactly when it was created electronically. So there's an electronic timestamp which will correlate to that electronic communication with a security certificate attached to it. And this is why the FCC is so important. Again, and it's not a matter of the time of the event, but the order in which those data elements of the events were entered. And the way the record presents is that there were some data elements that should have been entered prior to that decedent being named as a legal estate. There should have been a memorandum to acknowledge the discharge of a man and the arrival of a legacy heir as a living, breathing soul. An act of God. And again, if you remember the definition of loan, it literally says an act of God. So all that, the data elements were literally, because of an act of God given to the state, that is a loan. It's the same thing as a grant. It's the same thing as a gift.
For I concur. And when I was associated with the Franciscan order when I was younger, I had done some research with Father Thomas Lavin. And we had come up with the conclusion that it was very, let's just say it was very possible that Pope Gregory XIII had something to do with some warlock that had created that Gregorian calendar for the purpose of putting the world upon heaven and earth. And I haven't found any evidence that that's not the truth at this point.
Well, keep on it, because you know me, I'm one of the top dogs. I'm going to keep researching for the rest of my life. So anything I can get my hands on that will help fill in the holes and connect dots, I'm always appreciative.
Easy when you start
Yeah,
out with
well,
that.
I don't want
Like I
to
said,
have a contract with black magic, so I just use the Julian calendar. So,
All right.
all right.
the
All
private
right.
trust we'll talk about next, and then we'll talk about the personal trust in another video after that. But for the basics of it, again, like I said, these courts are all tax courts. They're all done on Federal Reserve notes, the transfer of, meaning that they're commercial courts. All crimes are commercial. It all ties in together and makes sense that HJR 192, Public Law 7310, proves the existence of an exemption. The fact that you have a Social Security account that's used as a pass-through account with a birth certificate, Social Security or certificate of live birth, and the county registrar's original certificated hospital statement of live birth. Those are all instruments, and they're all tied together, and they were all created because of the origin of your being born. So understand your capacity of trustor, trustee, and beneficiary. Also understand a lot of people.
And that's what we were talking about yesterday, John, that 95%. You have to understand it's actually 100% yours to begin with, and they own what they would consider, the other percentage. And that's merely the data elements that exist in that record. They don't exist anywhere outside of that record. Nobody would know that I'm 5'9" unless they looked at me and said, "Oh wow, that guy's 5'9". Let me get a tape measure and double check that." But when the record says it, everybody assumes it is absolute truth. And I'm telling you again, if you enter into a record that you're a resident or a United States citizen and you don't know how those terms are defined, then you've actually entered in false data elements. That's what makes that record false, and that is your fault for a portion of it, the state's fault for not educating you, your mom and dad for not recognizing the state doesn't educate you. Because I recognize the state didn't educate me. I didn't recognize it for a long time that I needed to educate myself in a much greater depth to fully comprehend what was going on. But again, I did recognize that the state wasn't educating me properly simply because my adoptive parents, and I understood this at a young age, they were homeschooling me at home, things that I never knew because the school didn't teach me. Very important to understand.
People think that before I let you go, I want you to know that these trusts,
They make their 5% look a lot bigger.
Oh yeah, they make their 5% look like 100%. Like we have no choice about it.
Remember the Twilight Zone episode where it was a 50-foot alien, but it turned out to just be hot air, just a big balloon. No, serious.
Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Remember that one too.
a lot of people think you have to have 2 or 3 people involved in a trust, and you don't. When it comes to the ecclesiastical trust, the only trustee capacity that anybody would have in that situation is the witnesses that you're going to entrust to get on a stand and verify in their private capacity that they actually witnessed your words and your will. So when it comes down to those capacities, we have to understand the state's never going to have that because they can't testify to the deceased testator's will. They know nothing about that guy, that person. So when it comes down to these trusts, you don't necessarily need even 2 people. You can create a trust by yourself. And just by the operation of law, the verification of the first-hand witnesses is limited just to that. They do not automatically become trustees. They just hold that capacity of entrustment to verify. So, and that's the uniqueness about the ecclesiastical trust. You do not have to have a trustee.
Yeah, it's just 2 or more witnesses in my name. That's the trustee. In my name. Trust in me.
You can play the...
In God we trust. Has nothing to do with money at all. It's an express trust. In God we trust. That's the most basic expression of trust there is. And again, it's ecclesiastical, and it's a reference to our Father which art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name.
the part of a trustee, but yet at the time or execution, you can play the part of the trustee, drawing up a will or defining a will, whatever. But when it comes time to execute the trust of the will, that comes upon somebody else, because now you're the deceased testator. That's the only time that you would be liable if it's done correctly, because you're not ever supposed to be liable for the property ownership or anything like that. You're just supposed to be able to have the beneficial use, and you always pass on the liability to somebody else. In ecclesiastical trust, there is no liability, because there is no benefit of another. You only prosper off of your own efforts.
Special K. When filling out a job application, do I mark I'm a citizen of the U.S.? I would not recommend it. This is not legal advice. I would not recommend using resident. I would recommend doing the research, again, like I've showed many times. You can't be a resident. Residents of the zone. No person shall reside within the zone except federal, state, or municipal officers or agents whose resident presence is deemed necessary by the board. United States citizen is a business. United States business is means a United States citizen. Therefore, a United States citizen means a United States business. So if you're going to mark those down, you better be organized as a United States business and be a resident in the state where you're conducting that business at a principal place of business known as a residence.
And those own efforts should never be a liability against somebody else. Shouldn't harm somebody else in order to be able to prosper. That's the basis of the ecclesiastical trust. So understand, the trust doesn't have to be serving upon three different people of man, of a category of man. It could be one man and two persons, fictional creations. Understand that stuff.
This again goes to that aspect that I'm not going to stop making profiles on YouTube unless I think it's qualified, unless I think I'm qualified to stop. I'm going to keep creating profiles so they can't deny my expressions. I have the right freedom of expression, and you have the right to know. So by them violating my right to express myself, they are also violating everybody else's right to know. Again, I can explain it to you, but I can't comprehend it for you. And if you're not worried about comprehending it because you don't know the difference and they violate my expression of that, you don't get to know that a United States business means a United States citizen unless somebody else tells you, because you're not doing the research. That's why I do those little shorts of things like that, to show you that you really need to wake up. Spell of illness, 42, Social Security, U.S. Code 1395X. The first definition is a spell of illness, and that's a definition on the first day of inpatient hospital treatment. What is your first day of inpatient hospital treatment in your entire life but the day you were born? Shouldn't that trigger you? It triggered the fuck out of me. Man, I got pissed.
So anyway, like I said, we'll talk about private trusts next video. And I hope if you have any questions, you'll ask me. I think the ecclesiastical trust is pretty simple. You just have, like I said in the previous video, you have to show the intent to create a trust. You have to name the parties of the trust. You have to show the purpose and intent and prove the validity of the trust, and express the intent. Again, like I said, that's just a simple statement of peace to carry out fair and impartiality with the rest of man, as you know them. Having the same inherent and unalienable responsibilities and duties to uphold that which is right amongst all and common amongst all. Just simple verbiage that can't be rebutted. American national civilian, that's a good one to use. The admiralty courts are considered a military jurisdiction. And if you look up the military's definition of a civilian, you'll see that it's somebody that's not a part of the military. So if they're bringing a commercial action against an American national who is in his private capacity, who is also proving that he's not in a military capacity, they're bringing a commercial action in a military venue under tax laws and using probate courts to establish the facts of a will so that they can execute a trust. Do you people understand how many...
And not execute a trust. Again, I used the wrong term there. Construct a trust.
I was wondering, under that spell of illness, is that not because of the action that mom takes, where she's treating the birth as if it's an illness and not a sacred event? When she
No,
goes to the hospital?
it's not anything that anybody does on purpose. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Mom doesn't know it. The doctors don't know it. The nurses don't know it. None of those people really know this. Do you think a doctor looks at the U.S. code? No, he goes by the people that tell him he's certified to be a doctor, and this is what you got to do.
Right. And then the nurse wouldn't know something such as why she puts silver nitrate in the eyes of the child, that's an ecclesiastical ritual that she's doing unknowingly, which we uncovered that is indeed something that's going on, because silver is considered the only viable form of money.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that one of these days, if I'm going to start doing audits of any sort, I would be going to the doctors, and I'd be showing them some of this stuff. See if I can wake them up, because they're the ones that are perpetrating all this paperwork according to the code that says they are required to get, do the birth registration stuff. No, you're not. Mom can register that birth, and she can do it under a private placement, not a public offer. There's a distinct difference.
One of the first people I'm going to go to is my dad, because he's high-end nurse practitioner in their system, and I've been having debates with him about this situation for decades.
Yeah. Well, let me finish this up, and then I got one code we're going to look at real quick to explain what's going on.
Financial, banking, trust,
Can I get you to speak up, get closer, or speak up louder? You are very low today.
I know they're messing with my phone. It's not just me alone, but I was just saying, is that why they always been pushing this thing about creating a will so they can just take everything through probate?
Yep, and that's why I'm stressing it's very important to learn how to express the will. If you can teach your children how to express the spiritual will, and how to help them develop their spiritual talents, that will allow their spiritual talents to develop appropriately. I think this public education system is horrid. And again, if it's the parents that are going through this public education system and think that they got done with high school and then they lived a good life and they don't need to teach their children any extras, that's a problem. I mean, I think 90% of the people can see severe problems with the way this society is running today, with all these wars and desolation of the lands and people that are going homeless and hungry in one of the most supposedly strongest nations of the world that are supposed to be able to provide the American dream. Oh, the American dream is to be born in the United States, be a military veteran, and then end up homeless. Is that the American fucking dream? Really? I mean, I think that's kind of an opposing dynamic to what the true American dream is, that the immigrants can come here and have a fucking heyday.
That's the American nightmare for sure.
Contract laws, they're violating doing all of this. It's amazing. They're violating almost all of them. Of course it's RICO. The problem is that it's all instituted by a process. So now we have to understand that process and fix it by using that process appropriately. Like I said, a trust within a trust within a trust, just like they do. That's how they protect themselves. We have to learn how to protect ourselves the same way. So understand the importance of the ecclesiastical trust, how much power it has, and that's why we put all the other trusts within that. So we have to establish that first. Establishing that ecclesiastical trust and that separation between the military institutions, the political institutions, educational institutions, commercial institutions, because we have our own spiritual institution. We have what constitutes us spiritually. That's our own Declaration of Independence, our own Bill of Rights, as you might say.
Again, that's what their foundational documents are all about, is the expression of a spirit. Remember, in the Declaration of Independence, they talk about how God is the one that empowers us. And that's the foundational principle of every trust there is. I don't care if you think it's ecclesiastical or commercial. That's the base foundation of all of it. You cannot deny that. Every religion around the world poses that.
Anyway, think about this stuff and realize how much it all connects to each other. Again, like I said, in order to protect ourselves, I think it's very important to learn how to construct a trust within a trust within a trust. So we talked about how to build the trust and the components of a trust in the last video. We talked about ecclesiastical trust in this one. We're going to talk about private trust in the next one. And then again, we'll talk about how that's instituted into the ecclesiastical trust. And then the next video, we'll talk about personal trust instituted into the private trust that is already instituted into the ecclesiastical trust.
I hope everybody understands that. Are there any questions with that? The trust within a trust within a trust. You've got your ecclesiastical trust that's expressed. My companion and I have the ecclesiastical trust. She will stand for me and I will stand for her. She is my trustee and I am her trustee. Quid quo pro, equal consideration, equal benefit. It is our private contract. So if we want to express that to the world, we can do so. In that, we can create a private trust, Keith and Joyce private trust. Faith-based union, something like that. Within that trust, then we can develop the personal trust for doing commerce. That is the trust that would have the organization and board of directors, employees, officers, documentation, and stuff like that. And that is the problem. The express or the implied trust that we have is such a trust under 12 U.S.C. 614, which is organization certificate. That's the birth certificate so established when you're born. There's an acknowledgement. That is the registration by the county registrar. Now, this is where it goes wrong because mom and dad, like I said, can register that for a private placement. But because they don't know that, it goes as abandoned property. The state or the hospital turns around and registers it with the state at the county registrar level. And that is an initial public offering. And that's why we saw on that vital statistics chart that they sell it. That is a public offering.
Can I add something to that, Keith, real quick? Because the way I've seen this thing is like, you know how they're taking the footprint in black, right? And then that registrar is stamping it and the insurance gets issued on the vessel, right? So that's a SOLE. It's getting special deposited into a soul bank, right?
Well, it's getting deposited into a general account.
But I'm saying there's not a SOUL bank, but a SOLE bank, and then black equals death, like civil death, right?
Well, I don't know where you got that, but again, that's more information. If you've got it, share it with me. But
I have some information. I might speak with you on that in another level, but I've actually seen so many levels of this where it appears that they're actually using magical sciences to bewilder and deceive, and that happened because of that 1666 P.I.G.S.C.U.N.T.S trust, where they pretty much deemed everyone dead in the year 666.
Yeah. So the rest of this, and we'll finish up real quick. And I'm not going to read this code. I'm just going to read the title because the title tells us enough. Acknowledgement was had, but it wasn't had by mom and dad, which could have put it as a private placement. So the acknowledgement was done by the state officials and everybody as a public offering, and the forwarding to, filing, and approval by Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. So we haven't gone beyond acknowledgement. None of this has ever been done. And that is, it wasn't forwarded to or filed and approved by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System to give you a permit to do business. So who permits anybody to do business in the United States? The Federal Reserve. That's who the filings are supposed to be done with. It says so right here, to a permit to do business. Body corporate. So you have to establish yourself as a corporate body of some sort. Sole proprietor, LLC, whatever it is. But it has to have a name, seal, corporate succession, contracts, suits, directors, officers, employees, and bylaws. This is the part that says it's more than just one body. It's several people that are able to fulfill the positions as directors, board of directors, so that you can hire an attorney to represent the corporate body in one of the administrative courts.
So is this not where the presumption of nonage comes in, and why we're dealing with an individual that appears to be a partnership rather than, like an the person operating under LLC or some other corporate status?
Absolutely.
And there's indispensable parties, including the Secretary of the State and the Attorney General, associated with that partnership.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And that's why. And that's why I say it's just a matter of going to the record. I'm not actually, according to the law, 12 U.S.C. 614, authorized or permitted to do business. I was authorized by the Social Security card or Social Security Administration to carry a card so that I could receive services. But I'm not the one carrying on business. They are.
So is that Social Security card then the insurance that is issued once the registrar stamps that certificate of birth?
Absolutely. Well, it's not. It's before the certificate of birth. You don't get a certificate of birth. There's not actually a certificate of birth made until you order one.
Right. So would his seal actually equal like the trustor, the one who created the trust? If one was to use that seal, then would it not give access to that one for the full faith and credit and then God we trust by utilizing the seal of the one that created it?
Correct. That's the birth certificate. It's got the state seal on it, and they ceded their jurisdiction to the United States, and that document or certificate is evidence of an obligation or other security of the United States. That's telling us that the United States
we don't understand these things.
Right. That's telling us that the United States is the grantee, and the state is the trustee, and the one that received it received it as a gift, as the benefactor, so that he could settle the accounts. There's no one else that can do it. All they can do is administrate the account and do it according to the record. It's not until somebody comes forth with their living will to settle the accounts that are being probated, because they're being probated in error.
I would concur with that.
All right. Well, with that, we are at the end of our stream tonight. Again, I want to thank everybody for your support. John, Iman, and Chris, thanks for coming up on panel. Everybody down in chat, appreciate it. Again, there's a like, share, and subscribe button down there for everybody. If you'd hit that, there's a PayPal link in the details for anybody that wants to share some love. Again, it's always appreciated. I certainly do need it and could use it for now. Like I said, I don't have mine set up yet, so I'm still operating on a doctrine of necessity. And until I can get this sorted out and show them that I am a creditor unto the nations and I'm willing to give everything I have, they're going to keep trying to hold things against me. So anybody got anything to say on the way out the door tonight?
I would suggest that perhaps if you wanted to do a recognition of that trust, you might in lieu of your own signature, you might add the registrar's sign and seal with respect to the birth certificated trust, and I think that might have some effect.
It's documentary evidence already. It's already expressing a trust. It's got let's take a look at 31 CFR 363.10. No, 0.6.
But then one would have the first duty of law to give notice if that the one was going to do that to the registrar and to the bank servicer if one was going to go after a line of credit with that. Most likely, I would suggest possibly
the terms are succinct and in plain writing, as we see here. This is 31 CFR 363.6. It says, what special terms do I need to know to understand this part? And this is relative to the Treasury direct accounts. And it says account means a treasury direct account as described in 363.10. What is a treasury direct account? A treasury direct account is an online account maintained by us solely in your name, in which you may hold and conduct transactions in eligible book entry treasury securities. So, like I said, that birth certificate is evidence of a trust, and it says under account, authentication means confirming that the person accessing a treasury direct account is the same person whose identity was initially verified at account establishment.
Now, a certificate would
That-
actually indicate that that's a copy of it, of some title to something. Would
Correct.
it not?
Correct. And it says here, beneficiary refers to the second individual named in the registration of a definitive savings bond, a converted definitive savings bond, or a book entry security purchased through the directory Treasury Direct system. Registered example, John Doe, Social Security number, payable on death. Joseph Doe, Social Security number. This is mom, payable upon death to the son or daughter. See, they're operating under mom's
Wouldn't not
trust.
that title, the title that's referring to, would that not be the vessel that we came in on? That
Correct. That's the
doctors send
enumeration. Yes, the enumeration at birth. It's an entitlement.
Right, so they're keeping that biological property under registration until one comes and makes a claim over it.
It's an appointment.
Correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, you got anything, John? I heard you poke in there real quick. Appointment.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be when the data starts. I mean, they're appointing some kind of entity who's, just held in abeyance.
Yep.
The record starts with the prenatal. Is that not true, Keith? The prenatal record?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if anybody's got anything else to say, now's the time to say it. We're done, and we're going to close out, and I'm going to grab me a bite to eat.
Oh, good show.
Well, thanks for tuning in, Keith. There's a lot of people out here that really benefit from your research and the research of all these other good people out here that take the time to come up on the panel and understand these very esoteric things. And it's about time that it happens, in my opinion.
Well, I think like I said before, it's getting better and better, and I think people are connecting more and more, and we will start seeing bigger and bigger changes. So I hope everybody else keeps at it as well as I do. And again, all glory goes to him. So with that, you guys know me. I love you, but I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back or not. That's to say, I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you don't respect me. That's on you. So may God bless you and have a good day.
All right. Be blessed.